Who do you hate? That's not where you thought the sermon was starting. Who do you hate? It's a tough question, right? We might all be tempted to think, well, hate's a strong word. I don't know that I hate anyone. But I bet if I asked you, who's the last person you were really angry with? You might be able to answer that one. Take a moment, close your eyes, take a deep breath, and think about the last time you were really angry. What were the circumstances? Were you angry because of something you perceived the other person did to you? Were you angry because something they did scared you, and you were afraid maybe for yourself or maybe afraid for them, and you felt angry? Do you remember what was happening in your body? Adrenaline, heartbeat pounding, maybe your hands were shaking or your jaw was clenched. It may not be the most pleasant emotion, but it's something that we as humans universally struggle with. And when we feel threatened or angry, it can be really hard to focus on anything else. And we live in a time when there's lots to be angry about. The injustices sometimes seem like they're too many to name. I feel angry that rich politicians are working to take away mine and millions of other people's health insurance, just so people who are already rich can have a little more money. I feel angry when Black Lives Matter protesters are labeled as terrorists, while the president of our country lays the blame for the violence at the white neo-Nazi rally in Charlottesville that caused at least 1 death and 19 injuries as being the fault of many sides. I feel angry that the forces of white supremacy in our society are working to pit us against one another instead of helping us work toward real solutions. I feel angry when someone I trust does something that hurts me, or when my neighbors are shot and killed by police. Sometimes I feel angry. The psalmist in today's text is angry too. The Psalms of Lament are remarkable because they're filled with all the anguish and pain and fear that we experience as part of the human condition. It's not some watered-down version of our lives, but the cries that come from our heart in the midst of the worst and the best experiences of our lives. Too often, prayer can become tepid and rote, or else be treated like some list we're writing to Santa Claus about what we want. But the gift of the Psalms of Lament is that they're grounded in reality. They express the very real vulnerabilities we have and the deep hope that the God of steadfast love cares about us. And we don't know exactly what the circumstances are that lead to Psalm 86. The psalmist doesn't go into detail, other than to convey that the situation is dire. What's so interesting is that the psalmist doesn't ask for vengeance, but rather for transformation. The psalmist asks God to change them, not the people who are attacking. Teach me your way, Yahweh, that I may walk in your truth. Give me an undivided heart to revere your name. The writer of the psalm goes on to describe a gang of bad guys that are threatening them, either literally or metaphorically. But unlike some of the other psalms, there's no real request for vengeance, but rather the faith that God does hear us and will respond, that God does care, that God will grant strength and favor to the psalmist in their despair. The people who rise up against the psalmist don't have that. They don't see things through the lens of God's love. And if we're being honest, sometimes it's pretty hard for us to do as well. Like the example in the children's sermon, anger, frustration, grief, and fear can narrow what we can see about others. It limits our capability to remember that we are loved and that love can never be threatened. So when we think about what's happening in our world today, when we read the headlines, We should be asking, what if we were able to see people or circumstances through the lens of God's love? God's love for all of us. 4 years ago, a colleague of mine asked the question, what if George Zimmerman's response to seeing Trayvon Martin wandering in the rain had been to ask if he needed a ride? It was right around the 1-year anniversary of the shooting death of Trayvon Martin. There had been a story on Facebook posted by a young man named Corey Shy. In it he said, "I am Trayvon Martin," and he posted it with 2 pictures. The picture on the left, he wrote, was taken when I was 17 years old, had just graduated from high school, and really didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. His 17-year-old self is wearing a sideways baseball cap over a do-rag and glaring at the camera. Based on my appearance in the picture, you would probably have labeled me a thug or a troublemaker. I only graduated in the top 50% of my class, and I took my ACT 4 times. A promising future in college doesn't look too well at this point, does it? But at age 17, Trayvon's age when murdered, I didn't realize how much I would be judged and stereotyped for the clothes I wore and my physical appearance. 2 months after that picture on the left was taken, I entered college and quickly realized that I wasn't pushing myself to be the best that I could be. I hardly studied in high school, but as a freshman in college, I began to study daily. As a matter of fact, I did so well that I was able to participate in a summer medical internship at Yale University. I then went on to graduate from Prairie View A&M University magna cum laude, and in 2 weeks, I will be entering Texas A&M Health Science College of Medicine to become a medical doctor. The picture on the right is where I am now just 4 years later at the age of 21. He stands clean-cut in a white button-down shirt, a blue and black striped tie, wearing the white coat of a doctor. The reason I'm sharing this with you is because I could have been Trayvon Martin. The defense team could have gone into the internet and found pictures of me that were similar to Trayvon's pictures and characterized me as a thug. They would have then portrayed me as the aggressor, and as a result of it led to my death. If that would have happened, then I would not have had the opportunity to reach my true calling, which is a medical doctor. My white coat ceremony is in 4 days, and it marks the next step in my journey. I could have been laying in a casket with a black suit, instead of being in a white coat trying to save lives. When I was 17, no one would have imagined that I would be doing so well and on my way to medical school. Who's to say that couldn't have happened to Trayvon Martin if he were still alive? He could have been the next doctor, or lawyer, or engineer, a teacher. Everyone has the potential, as long as they are alive, to achieve greatness and make a positive impact on this world. End quote. The picture we see, particularly when we are angry or frightened, is rarely the whole picture. When we see only our own pain, it makes it really hard to see what's going on with others. To help us have empathy for others who are oppressed and to see the ways we might be contributing to their oppression, because the part of the picture we can see is too small. It's not about the way we feel being right or wrong. It's simply what we feel. But if we're not careful, it can limit what we're able to see. And it can keep us from seeing the full humanity of the person standing in front of us, even if that person is us, or our kids, or our parents. Whether that is a relative at Thanksgiving with radically different political views, or the darker-skinned person on the bus that we've been told to be wary of, we need a way to expand what we see. Expand the possibilities of this moment. The way we see things makes a material difference in the world. The difference between how Jasmine Diamond was described in the media as a white woman killed by police, and the way Philando Castile and Diamond Reynolds, his girlfriend, were described. Philando Castile and Jasmine Diamond were both innocent. But when the police chief in Minneapolis responded about Justine Diamond that she did not have to die, this should not have happened, many of us were left wondering why the same thing hadn't been said about Philando Castile. He was painted, as so commonly happens when the victim is a person of color, as a thug, a possible robbery suspect, and a drug user. And we know that this isn't the case. The testimonies from his community poured in about how he loved his job and how many lives of the kids he served were changed for the better. What lens are we looking through? Because how we look at things and the ways we respond to them have a very real impact on those around us. It's easy for us to see what others do wrong, right? Especially when we feel we are the ones who've been wronged. But we need to find the capacity to see the complexities, to deal with ourselves compassionately while always allowing for that widening field of vision. We live in a complex time that requires a lot of us, and I don't believe we can do it on our own. But like the psalmist, we can cry out to God. We can rail and be angry and yell and scream. The brilliance of the Psalms is the realistic example it gives us and the permission it gives us to show up to God as ourselves, knowing that God loves us, that God's love is steadfast and God is slow to anger, that God cares about us. And like the psalmist, we can ask God to help us have undivided hearts, to help widen our field of vision when pain or anger or fear makes it narrow to the size of a pinprick. We can ask God to help us breathe and be able to see through the lens of God's steadfast love, that we are worthy and that the other person is worthy of God's love too, even in the midst of our anger and conflict. We can ask for God's grace and comfort. We can ask God to change us, not because the other person is right and we're wrong, or because we aren't justified in being angry, but for the well-being of our bodies and our souls, for the health of our relationships, and for our longevity to continue in this long struggle for justice. And so just maybe we can see through the lens of God, who sustains us with a love that is beyond imagining.